All right, and we are live. Thank you again to everyone who is attending live or who's watching the recording. We are here again this evening for another episode of Office Hours with Dr. Swathi. And these office hour sessions are to answer your questions. That's why we're here. We are both MSLs in the field. So I'm an MSL, and our guest is a senior MSL or a medical science liaison. We'll get into exactly what that is in today's session. And really what we're here to do is to answer your questions and to share a little bit about, our guests' journey to where they are right now in their professional career. So as I said, if you have any questions, this is meant to be interactive. Please put them in the chat and we will answer them as they come in. But in the meantime, as you're thinking of questions, we would love to, give a warm introduction to our guest. If you could please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about, what you do now.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Swathi. So my name is Dr. Siagat. So I'm currently a senior MSL. And first of all, our discussion tonight, everything that I'll be talking about here is based on my own experience. It's not related to my company. I just want to make sure that it's clear that I'm currently representing, I work for a company, but tonight is me talking to the audience and about my personal experience, not necessarily, linked to that company. So just currently I'm a senior MSL, like I mentioned, and then prior to that, I don't know if you're interested to know about the history, but prior to that, I'm a clinical pharmacist by training. I specialize in critical care and pediatrics. And then I also did before that, sometime as a, frontline worker, as a respiratory care practitioner as well. And then prior to that, many, many years ago, about 20 years ago, I was a researcher and I was in the organic chemistry research part and I did some work there too. And that's actually where my first doctorate degree is coming from a research side. So that's a little bit about myself.
Wow,
I'm
amazing.
happy to answer any question that you have in between those.
Wow, yeah, I actually didn't know that you started off as a PhD researcher. So let's start from there. So what got you interested into pharmacy in the first place?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. So I was a researcher prior to all of this. So working in the lab, mostly on the bench. So the job there was basically working on any molecules that we use to design those drugs. So that was the first thing that I did about 20 years ago. And then when I moved to the US, then I decided to change a little bit, to explore the medical field. That was for a personal reason to begin with, but that personal reason, linked to a family member, very close, my daughter family, member, she has a respiratory condition that led me to switch from, research and academic to go to the medical field. And that's where I went to do like a degree in respiratory care and started practicing as a respiratory care practitioner. But when I came to the US with that experience that I had in research, the goal was actually to kind of do some pharmaceutical research. But when I started doing the medical part, the clinical part of, as a respiratory care practitioner, I kind of loved it. And I realized that, okay, I kind of feel like I can contribute more being on the clinical side. Then I went back to do a second doctorate degree in pharmacy. And that's where, after that, I did residency and then started practicing. And then I then switched to the industry at some point.
Wow, amazing. And so, as you were working as a clinical pharmacist, when was the first time you heard of the medical science, liaison role? Like, when was the first time that came across your desk, so to speak?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting because to be honest with you, when I did the whole curriculum, school residency, I had no idea in mind about this role, nothing at all. And I have a very good friend of mine, I'll call him my brother, Dr. Sindri. He was a past graduate from the MSL Academy. At the time, it wasn't called MSL Academy; it was a different name. And then he kind of like started talking to me about the opportunities that I can have joining the role. And I'll be honest with you, I kind of run away from it for about a year or so. And one day, we met at it was at community event where he kind of sat me down and said, I really want to talk to you about this. You really need to hear about this. And that's when Dr. Swinji kind of like, explain. I honestly, the reason why I was running away from it is because I didn't understood exactly what exactly I was going to be doing as far as a role. And to me, I was more clinical driven, but at the same time, I didn't know that I can do something that at the same time I can have an even higher contribution to the patients. Not necessarily being with them every day, but looking at things on the more on the highest level. And when I started understanding about that, that's how I decided to to explore more about that opportunity, and I went ahead and contacted the program, and I learned about it, and interesting enough, I was able to secure something.
Wow. And so, when your colleague was telling you about the MSL role, what was it about the role that stood out to you? Like, what was that moment where you were like, yes, absolutely, I need to pursue this, and I need to make this my next career step?
Right. I mean, it was mostly first of all, if you have worked in critical care like I was, and also pediatric like I was, you can understand how intense that environment could be. Not that I'm running away from an intense environment, but it's very intense and it's very challenging. It's very, very demanding. And on top of that, if you have, other things on the side, like families that you also want to, take care of, sometimes it could be really challenging. I have youngest kids at the time, and I wanted to be involved in the, also social activities and be able to have some kind of flexibility, not necessarily having to drive an hour to work, things like that. So that's kind of what some of the things that really changed my mind as far as how I made my decision to switch and moving into the industries because of that, like that flexibility, that other part that I was able to to cover, right.
Yes. And so, in your words, what does an MSL do? Like, if you were to describe it in like two sentences, what does an MSL do, and what sort of role do they play in the industry and with healthcare providers?
I mean, just like the definition of the profession is medical science liaison. I mean, the liaison side is the side that is the biggest part of the role that we do. We are the liaison between the providers on the field, the patients on the field, and anyone interested to learn about some medical information on the field, and also the company who is actually working on those different molecules and medication for the patient. So we play that role of being a liaison and understanding clinically and also the data that behind what we're going to be discussing with the providers. So we get to play that role of being the liaison, and also sometimes bring some valuable information from the field to the company so that they can make some adjustment at the end of the day for the benefit of the patients.
Yes. And one of the questions that I get often is, what's the difference between, a sales representative and a medical science liaison? I think you partially already answered that, but how would you explain that to someone who's learning about the role for the first time?
Right. One of the biggest differences is that as a medical science liaison, you are not promoting anything. Your primary role is to engage in a scientific way about, a data, a disease state, or anything related to, how to manage a patient regarding a specific, we call that therapeutic area, and then with the providers. Now, in that engagement, it's pretty clear that we all understand that I am not selling anything, but I'm mostly sharing information and I'm mostly engaging to have some valuable information going both ways, or providing some valuable information to the provider clinically, right? Now, a salesperson will be promoting, and that's not the job that we do as a medical liaison. No, that is definitely, the regulation doesn't allow us to promote anything, but to engage in those productive and mutual, exchange scientifically and clinically.
Yes, definitely. And so you said, you learned about the role. Now all of our audience understands, what that role is. So tell us a little more about your experience with the MSL Academy from, the mentorship as well as some of the curriculum.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, my experience, first of all, if you look at my clinical background and my other professional background, you know, I mean, yes, I do have some credentials that definitely I can play a role like this. And on many ends, first of all, as a researcher, and then second of all, as a, frontline in clinicians, and then second of all, as a, clinical pharmacy playing, a role at different level. All that are great, clinical baggage that I can bring into the role. However, uh, I understood at the time that without understanding exactly what my role was going to be, it was going to be challenging for me to be able to break in. And that was one of the biggest reasons why I joined the academy and to have that mentorship. And I can see who is connected, but I know that many people reach out to me on LinkedIn and ask me, oh, tell me a little bit about how, what was the transition like? And I said to them, most of the time, you may have the best clinical background, everything will be great. You can even break in without having some support. But to me, I think having a mentor is actually something extremely valuable as far as somebody who can guide you about understanding your role and be able to articulate on that. And that is the easiest part to break in. Now, in my case, that's the decision that I made. And to me, I mostly saw that as an investment on myself. Now, investing on yourself, building yourself to be in a position where you're going to be needed by, companies and other organizations for the role that you are actually practicing. So to me, the academy was a big push as far as understanding my role and be able to articulate that during the interview process. Right?
Yes.
Extremely valuable. Yes.
Amazing. And so, can you talk a little bit more about mentorship and how mentorship has played a role, whether it was in your career leading up to being an MSL or now that you are an MSL or rather senior MSL?
Right. I mean, like I said, like I shared earlier, I mean, the biggest role that the mentorship has done for me was, first of all, when I joined the academy, I can have all the materials that the academy provided as far as, what I need to know about the role. But at the same time, sometimes you need to have the opportunity to engage with someone physically, virtually or whatever the venue is, but you need to talk to someone so that they can explain to you what the role actually is on the field. And that's where the mentorship is extremely, to me, is extremely valuable because you have someone who can explain to you in a clear fashion about, how you operate on the field. Or how do you engage with those we call them key opinion leaders? How do you engage with them? How do you maintain your relationship? How do you, bring yourself to being a big part of the team that you are working with? Because that's also extremely important. And then that's where the mentorship also plays a big role because, and I'm going to say this on my very first interview, of course, it's not like a one time thing that you apply one time and you get a job. It's a multiple step interview process, but you want to be in a situation where you engage during that process. You want to hear the question about where did you practice that role before, because you are so articulating on that, you are so explaining on that role that you asking people are asking where did you do that before. You're like, okay, I did a training but I have not actually done it. And then they would have, no, you sounds like you have done it. So, and in my specific case, that's what happened on my very first role when I broke in. My the hiring manager asked me many times, like, I mean, where did you practice that role before? And I was so proud to say, in fact, I did a program that trained me to understand the role, and then that's why I can easily talk about it. And the mentorship was a big part of that part. You know, and everything that the program says. And it a mentorship is not just about, yes, they mentor me in the program, but they almost also show me the path about how do you engage with others, other MSLs. How do you reach out to them on LinkedIn, how do you engage with them. And during that process, I was also so proud to be able to connect with some of those MSL before me. And one of them is Evelyn. I don't know if she's connected, but one of them, like, and on that mentorship, they are putting you on the path also on explaining to you what the role is entails, and then that's how you bring yourself to a different level. So
Yes.
they're very
Mhm.
valuable. Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. It's all about, the networking and the coaching and getting to know other people in the space. Absolutely. So you brought
Yeah.
up a little bit about the interview and kind of the application process. I'd love to go into a little bit more there. So we always ask the guests, how many applications do you think you sent out before you landed your first role?
Right. I mean, in my case is a little bit unique. I may not have. I don't know what other other panelists have said before, but in my case it was a little bit different. I would say I did about. It wasn't more than 20 applications, but
Wow.
people do more than that. I know.
That's the lowest I've heard, I have to
Right.
say.
Right. But my case was a little bit unique because when I joined the academy, in fact, after I had some couple of discussion with the program director, Dr. Sidoni Niba. After we work a little bit about how I can improve my profile on LinkedIn and how I can present myself, my resume, all those little things. I'll be honest with you. After that process, people started reaching out to me without me applying first.
Wow.
It's a little bit unique because, in fact, about a month and a half into the program, somebody reached out to me about a great opportunity that I actually took the opportunity, but I changed my mind later on. It wasn't necessarily an MSL role, but it was something close to that. And I ended up changing my mind, about 2 months later on, and then went back to the MSL role. But I did put less than 20 application in my case. And I think one of the reasons why it was a little bit, less was because I did follow the process, because there's a process that the academy is going to be, guiding you as far as how do you put yourself out there, how do you present yourself, how do you prepare for that first interview, the recruiter, the hiring manager, and then the panel interview, and so on. I did follow that very, in a very compliance way. Like I wasn't deviating from that process, not at all. And I'll use all the time that I had when I was driving to listen and listen and listen and listen again about all those things, so that when I get that phone call, I'll be ready to answer it, in a more professional and prepared way. So in my case, it took me a little bit less than others. But like I said, the first role, I think that role was mostly because I was able to articulate about the role, and they understood that I can perform based on the training that I had.
Wow, that's so great. And I mean, what a great, story and experience for you to have. A lot of other people, it takes quite a bit more time. But I would say, as you went through the interview process, what are, let's say like the top three tips that you have for, people going through the interview process. So the HR interview to the, hiring manager interview to the panel interview, the scientific presentation. What are some of the tips that you have utilized, now landing your first role and now getting a promotion to the senior MSL role, and having quite a bit of experience in interviewing? What would you, recommend to people who are on this path right now?
I mean, I would say first of all, try to learn about the people that you want to work with, the company, right? I mean, most of the time, those who wants to break into this role, most of the time they'll have the clinical knowledge that is needed for the role. And I will name it like, if you're a medical doctor, if you're a PA or pharmd, DNP, those APPs, advanced practice providers, it's mostly clear that it doesn't matter what the therapeutic area is, you are going to be able to understand it, unless it's something that you really don't like to work on. Some people will say, oh, I don't like oncology. I don't feel like I want to work in oncology. That's fine. But, the companies knows that they can train you on that if you are willing to open your mind for that. So to me, that's one part of the equation, but that's not the major part of it, because After they understand that you can perform on that aspect clinically. Now the other question is operationally, can you perform on the field? And that's one of the biggest part of it, because we know compliance and other things comes into play, where you have to understand your role on the field. So that's the reason why, to me, having the training from the academy was important. So very first tip for me is being about learning about the role. Now, if you learn it through a program like the MSL Academy, great, because you're gonna have professional, we're gonna put you on the path, right? Now, if you learn it yourself, I would say great, but you may not have someone who can guide you even more on what you need to do, or when some of those questions comes into play, because we have to operate on the field on the compliance way. So understanding the role, to me, that's the number one, because that's extremely important. Now, second, now, the company that you're applying for, you have to understand the culture, because you can understand the role, you can like the role, you can like the therapeutic area, but if you don't like the people that you're working with, it's going to be a problem. So you have to understand the company culture. How do you do it? You have to be able to read about what the values that they have is. You have to make sure that it match your value. So first is going to be, yes, you need to understand your role in the field. Second, you need to understand the company value. No, that's going to be very important. And then third, you have to be flexible in your mind and open to learn. You have to bring that humility into your game, that I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to learn from anyone, including those who have been in the field, less time than myself. When I joined my first company, I was the youngest MSL experience-wise for my company. Guess what? By the end of the year, my mentor, in fact, I was a little bit telling her, how I operate on the field based on the learning that I received, and she was taking actually a lot of things from me. Funnily enough, today she like to call me, I'm her mentor, but that's not the case. She was the one who mentored me on my first role. But with the flexibility, the humility that you bring in, the open-minded that you have as far as learning about the role, that's going to be a big thing on you be able to succeed. So those are the
Amazing. Yeah, those are all great tips. So understanding the role, understanding the culture, and really your open-mindedness and willingness to learn. I think that could be applied to, starting a new role, starting a new hobby, starting so many new things. So I think that that's just amazing advice. So what do you say to, people who are listening in who feel like, they might not be qualified for the role? Because let's say they have a pharmd, they have an MD, they have a PhD, they're a nurse practitioner, but they feel like, oh, I don't have any MSL experience, I don't have any medical affairs or industry experience. What would you say to someone who's feeling like that right now?
I mean, I would kind of say something that I said earlier. I mean, if you have that feeling, that's the same feeling that I had, when I was trying to break in. Like I said, in my case, honestly, like other people may even have heard about the industry work before, practicing as a pharmacist. In my case, I did not have any idea about the role. But when, my good friend of mine, the good friend of mine, start talking about the role to me, I kind of understood what the role was, but I felt like I needed to bring myself to a different level, not to be like any other candidate who can apply just because they have the credential, but a candidate who can apply because they have the credential, yes, but they can also understand the role and they can perform on the role on day one, right? So I would say my biggest advice to someone who's trying to break in now would be, please make sure that you find a place where somebody can really train you about the role. It's extremely important, because if you already have those degrees that you mentioned, pharmd, MD, no PhD, depending on the area in PhD, or maybe APPs, you are you are already, like, you can understand the clinical part of any disease state, but you have to be able to operate on the field. So that's the other part of it. And that's where, I would say the biggest advice for someone looking to enter the medical affairs industry will be, please put yourself in a position where you can train yourself, and then I think that's going to be a big push from that. Yeah, because that's what I did in my case. And the advice that I'm giving here is nothing different than people. I will tell you, Dr. Swati, people reach out to me on LinkedIn every day, every single day, and ask me this question. And I always make sure that I answer the question. Why? Because people had to do that for me also when I was looking to enter. When I started the program, I followed the process like I said, reach out to a couple of MSLs on LinkedIn, reach out to a couple of people, and I learned from them. One of the biggest advice was you need to understand the role. You need to understand the role. If you don't understand the role, how would they give you the job that you don't understand how to perform the job? How do you learn? You can join an academy like this one. You can, whatever process you have to understand the role, basically.
Yes, definitely. And on that note of understanding the role, could you describe a little bit about I know every day looks different, but what your weeks look like on average? What are you doing? How are you spending your time at work?
Right. Now, spending the time I work, I would say, first of all, would depend on the company. And, a regular week, I will just describe a week. Like I said before, it's not necessarily the week that I have my current company. It's not linked to that. But a regular week that I would say a week for me will be okay. On Monday, for example, I can have an administration day on Monday where I'm going to have, a couple of meetings with the team, could be with my director, maybe with the entire medical affairs team, a couple of meetings scheduled on Monday. And then also the day for me to plan, maybe not necessarily that week, but maybe 2 or 3 weeks from there. Because something about this role is also about being extremely self-sufficient enough to be able to plan because you are like your boss in your territory. So you have to control it. You have to make sure that you're meeting, some aspect of your role, and you have to be able to manage to get to those goals that you have set for yourself, or maybe the team has set for you, right? So on Monday, I may be starting planning on 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time, knowing that okay, I'm planning on meeting, XYZ providers for XYZ reasons. Then I'm gonna start sending them maybe an email or something, kind of reach out to them on Mondays, and then like that. And then on Tuesday, sometime it will be a day that I might be traveling. The travel there will depends. Could be a local travel, maybe because I have to meet someone not too far from me, but it could be also a travel where I need to fly, right? So usually I will reserve that from like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays. I could be out on the field, and then on Fridays I might be back in home office to do some other administration work, like closing out on my weekly report, putting in any inside information that I have, doing my, expense report, because that's a big part of the job. You spend the money, but you have to expense the money. You have to show what you have done with the money that you spend during the week. So I like to do that on a weekly basis. I wasn't good at that at the beginning, but I like to do it on a weekly basis. So Friday for me will be to kind of clear those things, and then also have some additional, meetings with the internal team, if any. Now, it doesn't mean that Mondays and Friday I cannot meet people for work. No, it doesn't mean that. That's my preference. But sometimes you may have these providers that is just available on Mondays or Fridays. Then you just need to adjust. That's all. You just need to adjust. So that's a little bit of a description, you know, big description, no, without having to give too much detail about okay what those meetings will be entailing and those kind of things. Yes.
Yes, and yeah, I appreciate that because I think that's what a lot of people are wondering about is like, okay, I want to understand the role, and I have read the descriptions, but I think to actually hear it from you is great. I do want to, I see so much, engagement in the chat. Anyone who has any questions, please do not hesitate to put them in the chat so that, we can get them answered for you before the end of our session today. If there are no other questions in the chat right now, please, put some in there, but I will continue asking my questions. So I have, I'm wondering, so, you've transitioned now from being an MSL to a senior MSL. Can you talk a little bit about that transition and how your role is different now, or if it's different at all?
Right. So, I mean, like any other job out there, when you transition to be in a senior position, It just means that you're gonna have more responsibilities. They're looking to have more from you, meaning that the level of engagement that I have internally, as far as project and other things that may be attached to my role, will be a little bit more than just being a regular MSL. I'm just gonna give a few examples. As an MSL, you may not necessarily be in a a board in a global board of this team working on a specific project. But as a senior MSL, you need to take a little bit more responsibilities as far as your role for the team, and also the level of of work that we can perform for your own team. Maybe now being a liaison for a clinical trial, maybe now being a liaison working on a specific project about I don't know, I'm just guessing here, like the company wants to do a community engagement with a different an institution. You may be the one leading that, maybe an advisory board. You may be the one also now, helping to build that and be able to assist, do a few things on the advisory board, things like that. So it just brings a little bit more responsibilities on your end, given the fact that, they understand that now you perform, very well on the field. You have engaged at a different level with a lot of providers, then you can take that senior position role where you have more responsibilities, basically.
Yes. Okay, that's helpful. And I do
Mhm.
see a question in the chat from Dina. So, how did your clinical experience, how has your clinical expertise helped you when you started, and how is it helping you currently as a senior MSL?
Right. Yeah, that's a very good question. And like I said before, I said something before, like any of us who have a doctorate degree, mostly clinical degree like MD, pharmd, or APPs, GNPs, you can understand any disease state. However, uh, if you get to practice in a specific role as a clinician, like in my case, if you get to have a lot of experience in critical care, for example, or pediatrics, for example, or maybe respiratory, for example, like in my case, I can easily take a role in critical care, in pediatrics, patient care, in respiratory patient care. It doesn't matter the population. Now, it helps because at that point, when I take a role like that, I'm extremely valuable for the company, and I'm also extremely valuable for the providers on the field. Different than if I was taking a role in, let's say, oncology, that I'm not too strong in oncology because that was not my specialties. It was one of the specialties that I did in my background. I'm going to have to learn a lot there. And then, yes, I will connect with them and I would engage with the providers, but the level of engagement will be different than someone who has specialized in that. Now, my clinical work, for example, I'm going to take an example. As a respiratory care practitioner, when I go out there to engage with a pulmonologist, or maybe an allergist, or maybe, you know, any physician that takes care of respiratory conditions, my level of discussion, I'll be honest with you, will be different than someone who has the same role but have not practiced on the field, because I can relate to any discussion around that. They can talk about anything related to respiratory conditions. I'll be well suited to be able to engage on that. And when I engage in those topics, I can easily bring that back to the topic that I want to engage with that provider on. That's where the biggest difference is when you are very specialized in a specific area. I can navigate that conversation front and back with that, be very comfortable doing it, and be able to get the information that I'm trying to have from the provider, and be able to share some valuable information to the providers as well. That's when one of the biggest difference is. No, and that also apply when you get to that senior position role, because now as a senior medical or science liaison, I may be engaged now, maybe sometimes it just depends on what the company is working on, maybe in a global stage about something. Now, on that global stage, you're going to be the medical liaison person that sometime on that discussion, you may say, hey, this consideration, by the way, when you work on the field, That's not how the patient will see this. That's not how the provider sees this. Why? Because you have practice and you have, have enough experience to guide that thinking on exactly what is going to benefit those patients. That's the biggest difference, right? Even though we can all do the same role, that's going to be one of the key differences about how I can add more than someone else can add in my specific area.
Great. Yeah. And thank you so much for your question. If anyone else has questions, please do not hesitate to continue populating the chat. So in the meantime, as we're waiting for other audience questions, I would love to ask you, what are the top 3 skills you think MSLs need to be successful in the role? Another way to think of that question is, when you look at MSLs that who are very successful in the field, what are 3, attributes that they have?
Oh yes, you have to be someone who like to build relationship because your role is going to be about also building relationship with some of the key opinion leaders or providers on the field. So you have to be someone who like to engage in conversation, who like to connect with people. That's one of the biggest quality because that engagement is going to bring all everything that comes with it, flexibility as far as how you thinking, how you engage with them, how you share your information. That's going to be one of the biggest skills that you need to succeed on your role. Now, second, you have to be a team player. And I think I mentioned that also earlier for a different question. Now, that team player mindset is that for my team, what am I bringing also that can support my team to perform, the role? Now, because the more you, because this is not a job that you do it and you say, okay, it's just me. You're working with a group of people and you own your own territory. That's one. But two, you can also get help from your colleague while covering other space in the country. Why? Because they may have a relationship with someone in your own territory that you are trying to build. But if you are not a team player, they may not be open necessarily to work with you on those ends because everybody owns his own territories. Now you have to be a team player, be able to support your team internally and be able to, represent the company that you're working out, for out there in a very professional way. So that's the second thing that's going to make you succeed. Now, I mean, the third thing that I come to mind, what else can you bring into that? I mean, just being yourself. I mean, you have to be yourself out there. You have to show, the level of professionalism that you have, show your clinical, because at the end of the day, even though, like I said earlier, that each of us who have a J degree can perform the role, you have to make sure that you become a real expert on that specific area because you're gonna your like your reputation can easily, you know, like fade away from you if you don't show yourself clinically that you understand what you're talking about. Think about yourself engaging out there with professional because some of them are actually global leaders on the field that you're covering. And most of them are the US is one of the biggest market, if not the biggest market in the world. Everybody wants to be in the US market. So at the same time, the biggest research that bring a lot of value also in the medical field are most of the time done in the US. That's why everybody will come to the FDA to make sure that everything is vetted by the FDA before they can run the research. So you're going to be dealing with some global leaders that are the leaders in those fields in the world. Think about yourself engaging with them and then not knowing exactly what you're talking about, then that's going to be a big that's going to ruin your reputation. So those are the things that you have to make sure that you keep in mind.
Yeah, I love that you brought up teamwork because I think so often the MSL role is thought of as, autonomous and setting your own schedule and working kind of in your own silo. So I love the idea of bringing it back to teamwork. You don't hear MSLs talking about teamwork that often. So that was nice and
Oh,
refreshing.
it's
Yeah.
extremely important. It's extremely important because you want to be a key part of your own team, meaning that they know that they can rely on you to deliver, and then they also can rely on you, or you can rely on them. Sometime when you need help or any kind of things related to your role on the field.
Yes, definitely. And we have another question in the chat. So the same person who asked the previous question came back and asked like a follow-up. So I'm specialized in long-term care pharmacy and management of outpatient pharmacies. Do you have any recommendations for me to excel as an MSL?
Right. I'm not sure if the person in MSL already or just a
No, so the
clinical.
person is not an MSL already. I think
Oh,
they're an aspiring MSL.
okay. I
Mhm.
mean, one of the thing about long-term care, I mean, especially to excel, if you want to break in, you have to find one specific area where you feel very strong about it, because long-term care kind of encompasses a lot of things in it. You know, a lot of disease state. You know, but you may, depending on where you are doing your long-term care work, you may have in that facilities, something like a trend, maybe cardiovascular patient coming in. Maybe that's why you get to manage regularly. If that's the case, that means that it's something that you definitely going to be strong on it, because you are managing those patients regularly. So to me, that's going to be a little bit of a clear path for you to start understanding that this is an area that I really look like a special, like one of the expert on that field. Then what about I grow that and become, and do the transition to be, the MSL for that specific field. So to me, it's just an example, but it could be two or three of those. It may be cardiovascular, maybe renal, maybe something else. You know, whatever it is, you have to figure out those three things that you feel like you are an expert managing those patients in long-term care. That's where, to me, I'll put the focus on to build myself to become even, have a different level of expertise into that before now, seeing how I can expand that into a MSL role. But you have to show that you are, a specialist on something that you can bring that value back to the company.
Yeah, and I would add to that, and in addition, so a lot of pharmacists, whether they're like retail pharmacists, clinical pharmacists, or pharmacists that are like you, Dina, the one who asked the question. A lot of people are wondering, how do I leverage this background, especially if I feel like a jack of all trades, but I don't really have a specific specialty because I'm not, a clinical pharmacist in critical care, in respiratory care, but instead I see so many disease states or conditions every single day. To me, it's all about framing. And so if you feel like you know a lot about quite a few different disease states, so that could be cardiovascular, endocrinology, psychiatry, neurology. I'm just thinking from your perspective, Dina, like those might be some of the things that you could, some of the therapeutic areas that you could talk about. So I would structure your resume, especially if you're going to apply for a cardiovascular focused position or cardiometabolic position, that you focus in your interview on all the different things and experiences and examples that speak directly to your experience from cardiovascular or cardiometabolic, because you have such a great varied experience in that clinical setting. So I think that a lot of people think, oh, you need to be a clinical pharmacist, you need to have this specific specialty. I think that that could be super helpful. But if you feel like you're in a practice setting where you're actually thinking about and talking about and working with patients in across multiple therapeutic areas, I think that makes you even more marketable. But what you need to do is when you apply to those specific roles, you need to have variations of your resume and variations and different examples in your interview stories to really specialize the experience. Because if you have that many therapeutic area opportunities that you can apply to, that's amazing. But you just need to make sure that you're sending the right information to the right roles and articulating your experience properly.
Right, right. And I'll add to that. That's a very important point that you mentioned. Mostly because I have also interacted a lot with some of the retail pharmacists who have the same feeling that, okay, maybe this is not for them. I would say no. In fact, the person who led me to be an MSL was a retail pharmacist. So, and he's an MSL today. He has been MSL for many, many years. So, that's not true. But in fact, the retail pharmacists and long-term care and other pharmacists working, outpatient on outpatient settings, or have a lot of experience, but they just need, like you mentioned, they just need to know how to tailor that experience to what is been they're looking for, for that position. Because and that's where having a mentor, an expert to help you out plays a big role. Because you can have all that experience, but you just don't know how to talk about it, right? And that's where you can see when you sit down with someone and they start explaining to you that in fact you have a lot of experience, then you might think in fact you have a lot to share and to showcase out there, then what you can that's when you're going to start to bring all those things together. It's always important. Even in my case, I mean, I had to sit down so that they can tailor everything and say yes, even though this you have this and that, you can now have bring that into a couple of thought and put that out there. That's very
Yes,
important.
and they definitely want to see in the interview process the potential. Because for example, you could be, a clinical pharmacist in a specific area, or you could, as we're talking about, be in this clinical setting where you see multiple therapeutic areas or disease states, but they want to see, okay, maybe the role is in dermatology. You don't know, rather, you don't have as much experience about dermatology. You're not a dermatology specialist, but they want to see the potential in the interview that you're willing to learn, that you know enough about these therapeutic areas that you would be hit the ground running and learn what you need to know to be successful in the role. So that's also a key part of it as well.
Right.
Okay, so we have another question in the chat. Again, I hope I'm not mispronouncing anyone's name, but Andrea has a question for us. What advice do you have to get recruiters or hiring managers to want to interview you?
Oh, thank you, Andrea. That's a good question. I mean, usually, like I said at the beginning, that I was a process compliant person as far as what the program was telling me to do, is because the way that the program is designed, they have a specific design where they're gonna tell you that okay, week number one, this is what you should be doing. Week number two, that's what you should be doing. Things like that. I did follow that process very closely up to the point that okay, this week you're ready to see if you can engage with recruiters, right? Now that engagement part of it is like, okay, now how am I going to present myself to the recruiter out there? So sometimes you have to present yourself to them, before they can actually look at you and say, hey, this is someone that I need to talk to. And that guidance about, how to present yourself is very, very important, right? And then, I did advise that, if you can be in a setting where somebody can guide you on that, that would be great. But otherwise, usually it's like, okay, I'm presenting myself to a recruiters, you know, and this is what I want them to see based on what they have. Because sometimes they may have an opening, they may not have an opening. And as far as the recruiter, you also have to make the difference between a primary recruiter for a company and someone who is just contracting, to recruit for those companies. There's the difference between those two, and those differences, honestly, uh, can be explained to you better also by someone mentoring you to understand how should I engage with a contractor recruiter and how should I engage with a primary recruiter for a company, because it also matters on how you engage with those entities and how you present yourself. And once again, on that end, how do you? I think I shared at some point that after I worked on my professional, profile, for example, people started reaching out to me without necessarily me reaching out to them. It also depends on how you present yourself on your profile, your LinkedIn, and all those things, right? Because the way that you present yourself will make people feel like they want to talk to you, and they can proactively reach out to you instead of you reaching out to them, things like that. So you have to factor in, those things. And to me, uh, it's a matter of knowing where to get the information and how to put that information out there.
Yes. So I would love to add to that. So I agree about LinkedIn and optimizing your LinkedIn so that, yes, you have recruiters reaching out to you, not only you reaching out to recruiters, but it is a two-way street, right? So we can have people reaching out to us. But the other thing I always say is if you're applying to a role and you're very interested in it, this is what I do. It's worked for me in the past and it's worked for people that I've given this advice to is, if you're really interested and let's say it's at a big pharma company, go into the LinkedIn profile of the big pharma company, look underneath people on LinkedIn, and underneath the people, there's a search bar and search, like HR recruiter, search, people, like something to do with HR that has to do with medical affairs. Because the way it works oftentimes in big pharma companies is that they will have HR people that are specific to, certain functional areas. So you can search things like that and then just start, trying to connect with these people. Once you've connected with them, send them a message and say, my name is so and so. I recently applied for this job. Really looking forward to, hearing from the team. Just something as simple as that. And then oftentimes I would also recommend adding just one sentence that says like, my name is so, well, after my name is so and so. The second sentence would be something like, my experience is I have X amount of years as a clinical pharmacist, X amount of years as a, in this case, a long-term care, pharmacist. And I recently applied to this role, something where it gives them a little bit of context as to like, okay, this is the name, this is the person, okay, cool. And then the lookout for your application. The other thing when you're submitting job applications, since I'm talking about that anyway, is I would suggest only apply to jobs that have been posted within the last like 72 hours. Chances are, if you apply to jobs that are posted after that, they might not end up reviewing your application. You might just get an automatic rejection, which a lot of people will take, very personally, but that does not mean that they, were not interested in you. It doesn't mean that they weren't, you weren't qualified, but it just might mean that they got so many applications in the first 72 hours, they're not even going to look past that. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, when, you want to be recognized by a recruiter, it's really important that you optimize your resume every single time you apply somewhere. So you can't just like have one resume and send it out everywhere. So as I mentioned, if the role is specific to cardiology, cardiometabolic health, that you have a version of your resume that's specific to that. And even more nitty gritty than that is when you have the job description, make sure you look for some of the keywords in the job description and you put that in your resume, because their, AI algorithm situation is going to look for certain keywords. And so even like certain companies, they don't call them KOLs, they call them therapeutic leaders, or, even things as simple as that is like, you have to do enough creeping and looking at the job description to realize like, if you're calling it KOLs all over your resume, but their job description doesn't even use KOLs, they use therapeutic leads or therapeutic leaders or therapeutic thought leaders or something, some version of that, and you don't have that anywhere in your resume, then you're not going to get flagged for a hiring, manager, or for even an HR interview.
Right, I agree, and I'll add on top of what you just said, that because you mentioned something very important, reaching out to some of the HR recruiters on LinkedIn, messaging them, and I will share something that I have done that I also worked for me in the past. After seeing that job application, reaching out, I have my rule of reaching out. I had my rule of reaching out to at least 4 to 5 people from the company, uh, at different roles. I will reach out to HR. I'll reach out to someone which is maybe the director, someone which is just an MSL, and then I even went ahead and reach out to one VP one time. And do not believe that they are not reading your message, because they may be reading. They don't answer it. It doesn't mean that they didn't read your message. And I will share with you that my first role, somebody that I reached out to read my message, did not reply to me. Somebody else contacted me. And after HR said we needed someone with 5 years of experience, in fact, let me tell you a little story. It's gonna be too short. So this is what happened. I'm applying for a role. Someone from HR, the global HR director, called me and said, "Hey, look, I mean, I I reached out on LinkedIn. He said, "Hey, look, I read your resume, but look, this position is open for someone who has 5 years of experience. You are not qualified for it." I said, "Okay, thank you." But 30 minutes after, I'm getting another phone call from the same company. Now it's the hiring manager calling me and asking me can I talk to you? I say, "Yeah, of course." He's like, "Okay, can we had that conversation," and that was it. And he was the one asking me, "Are you available to move for another interview, the next step?" I was like, "Yeah, I am available for it." So, and when I joined the job, I'm realizing that even during the interview process, when I did the panel interview, there was the VP on that interview call, and I think she read my message and she contacted the director for the job, the hiring manager, and said, "Please call me this person." Even though he was listed for someone with 5 years of experience, I had zero as an MSL, but I got a job. So don't assume that they are not reading. It's just how you present yourself. And then understanding the role, once again, is very important because I got that role because I understood what my role was and I was able to articulate on that. And that's when the deal was sealed for me from that phone call. Even though HR was not like, okay, you are not meeting the basic qualifications for 5 years. But I got the role, even though it was written only 5 years. So you have to know how to present yourself.
Yes, definitely. And something that I always say, whether it's an MSL role or any role, is that whatever is in the job description under requirements is always a recommendation. It's always a suggestion. They put that there as like a guide. But just because you don't have those things doesn't mean that you should not apply and try for it. We have one final question in our last final minutes. That was the quickest hour ever, but just one final question that's come in the chat. Could you speak about the different steps of the interview process?
Oh yeah, sure. First of all, it's not going to be a one-step interview process. So it's not like, okay, I'm getting to some in like that job where I'm just going to meet one person. That's it. It's going to be multiple steps. Now, the process usually is this. No, you're going to speak to a recruiter. Sometimes you're going to start by the recruiter. And then based on how the recruiter sees you, they may refer you to the hiring manager. Now, the hiring manager, in fact, is going to be the person. The recruiter, first of all, wants to know mostly, okay, do you understand the role? They may not have enough information as far as the clinical aspect of the job, because they're not going to be the one judging you on the clinical or your clinical knowledge, but mostly on the operational. Can you fit? Do you meet any criteria that this job has that I have on my desk? Yes, 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 yes. I think after speaking with you, you can move to the next step. They're going to recommend you to the next step. Usually, it's like the hiring manager, because then they want to know clinically, I mean, are you able to do this job? And then also operationally, can you perform the job on the field? When they have the feeling that yes, this candidate is someone that I can move, to the next step, that's when they're gonna move you to someone else, maybe two or three people, maybe a panel discussion, something like that. They're gonna move you to the next step. And then, that's where you're going to have to engage with even more people from the company until the last step. Now, from the beginning, the pool is always very wide. Like you have a lot of people applying for that role, so they're going to start, looking into a couple of candidates, and then when you move to the more you move to the next step, the less candidate you have, but you always going to have at least one or two or three people that are competing for the same role. So you have to show at the end that you're going to be the one that is fitting to that role. So at least 3 steps, but most of the time I have done 6, 7 steps depending on the company. So and you just have to every time make sure that you are performing to the best that you have to be the candidate that they're going to be pushing to the next step. Understand the culture of the company. Very, very important. At the end of the day, they also want someone who's going to join the team that they're going to enjoy working with. So you have to understand the culture.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much to everyone for your engagement, for your great questions, for all the, great discussion that's going on in the chat. So if you'd like to learn more about making the transition to becoming an MSL and you'd like some support and some guidance or even some free resources, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. You can send me a DM, you can send, Dr. Siagat also a DM, or you can head to the MSL Academy. to, you know, schedule a free discovery call to learn a little bit more about how we can help you in this process. I'm one of the coaches at the MSL Academy. Our guest as well is one of the coaches at the MSL Academy, and actually quite a few of our alumni that were once students and, you know, went through the program that are now MSLs in the field now give back to help the next generation of excited people to join the field as well. And yeah, so thank you again to everyone who attended live. Thank you to everyone who's watching the recording right now. And we will be back early next year for our next office hours. We do these on a monthly basis, and they will always be free. And whenever anyone wants to come and ask a question, you're welcome to do so. Alrighty, thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
and happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.